Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me at the conference. My name is Wendy Nather, and I lead the advisory CISO team at Duo Security, which is now part of Cisco. And I want to talk to you today about democratizing security. So, first, I have a question. You ready? What were we thinking? No, seriously, what were we thinking? I know what we were thinking. We were thinking that you had to know how to code in order to use technology, and that companies would be the only ones using technology, and they would dictate how and when this technology was used. Well, that's not working out so well anymore, is it? It used to be that we people in technology were the masters of the universe. We bought everything, we managed everything, we issued all the devices, we pulled the cables, we maintained the hardware, we wrote all the software. But now things are different. A lot of the devices are being purchased personally, and a lot of those users are just going home and doing whatever they want with their own devices. They're saying, don't you dare delete the data from my device. And of course, we have software in the cloud and every place else. So, things are very different, and we are still trying to secure this this new setup with an outdated security model. So it's time to break the model and put it back together. Now, what would that look like, putting it back together? I have some ideas that I'm going to share with you. One of the most important ones is that we are all consumers of technology now. So that means that technology belongs to all of us. And if it belongs to all of us and technology has been democratized, then it's time to democratize security. Now, this might mean something different to everybody. It doesn't mean securing democracy. That's a whole other talk, and I'm sure you're hearing plenty about that right now. Um, it can mean things like people sharing security tools with other people outside of the industry, or it could refer to what 451 research refers to as the rise of the citizen collaborator, where citizens, people outside of the industry, are doing research and bringing vulnerabilities and things like that. I'm going to talk about what it means to me and what it means to some of the people that I've discussed this with. And by the way, I'm also going to describe 3 ways that I think we can go about starting on this journey. So let's look at number 1 first, where we are going to talk about going from control to collaboration. And here's a great quote about democratizing security. When you can't control people's behavior, you have to deputize the majority of users to be CIOs. Security should be designed to be adopted rather than just engineered to be enforced. And this is a quote from my great grandboss, Doug Song, who was a co-founder of Duo Security together with John Oberheide, and he's now GM at Cisco. And he was the first person I heard the words democratizing security from. It used to be that we had work stuff and we had life stuff that we used in technology. We used very, very different applications, different hardware. You would go into the office and use only the system that you were issued there. And it was very different software from what you would use at home. So nobody would go home for fun and log into an ERP system, right? Right? Because if anybody does do that for fun, please raise your hand because I want to stage an intervention. But now the software that we use is pretty much the same as what our companies and our employers use. Social media, Office or Gmail, whatever. We're using the same thing for personal use as we're using for business use. And a lot of times the only difference is the login name that you're putting into the login field. There is no other difference. So there's a very thin line now, a thin veil between the personal and the business, between what your employer has a right to know about and supervise and control and what they don't. And that line has gotten so thin that people have gotten very nervous, and understandably so, about what their employers are allowed to do, what they're allowed to see, what they're allowed to scan. And it can kind of turn into a power struggle between employees and employers. And that's not too pretty. When I was in charge of security for the EMEA region of a Swiss bank, my team told me that whenever I would walk the trading floor, the traders would see me coming and they would quickly unplug their modems from their workstations and hide them in the desk drawer, wait until I went by, and then they would pull them out again and plug them back in. Now, was I the real security risk? No, but I was the most visible one. And this was an issue about control deep down. So people behave this way when they're starting to worry about whether they can keep control of what's important to them. This is why we need to talk about shifting from a control model of security, an authoritarian model, to a collaboration model. And the collaboration is going to take a lot of different forms. My friend Andy Ellis, who is the CSO of Akamai, who some of you know, would tell me about when the business would come to him and say, "We want to do this thing. Is this safe to do?" And he would say, "I don't know. Is it? You tell me." Now, that sounds kind of snarky, but he actually has a point in that he can't necessarily judge the opportunity versus the risk the way that a business person can. As developers, as architects, as technologists, we can't estimate the opportunity, which is the other side of that risk. And that's why we need to put those decisions back in the hands of the business. Now, the idea of collaboration is actually not new. About 20 years ago, the Jericho Forum in the UK, a bunch of CISOs of financial institutions got together and they talked about what it would be like to have what they called a collaboration-oriented architecture. There's that word, collaboration. Now, that idea that everything should be treated as if it were on the unsecured open internet is what we are referring mostly to today as zero trust. Now, some people don't like that term. I'm not wild about it myself, but it's very popular right now. I'm going to go with collaboration instead, because deep down, what we're talking about here is a model where you can say, look, do what you want with your device on your own time. But if you want to access our company resources, you're going to need to meet our security requirements. And you figure out how you're going to do that, and you let us know. So zero trust is really about collaboration. What would this look like in an architecture? And why is zero trust so radical? Well, here you can see I have a very, very simple, kind of outdated, bare bones, high level architecture drawn here. But I can tell you that most companies are still thinking of their infrastructure in this way. They're still thinking about everything being in the data center in this little green square as being under their control. There's an internet out there, and there's just like only one line going in. There's only one connection to the internet with a firewall in it. And we know that's not true. I think sometimes we tend to take our little simplified PowerPoint diagrams for reality. And we know that the real infrastructure is much more complex than this. In fact, as I like to point out, there are layers to every one of these systems, every one of these entities. And even if you control something like a web server in your data center, you may not control the layers under it. That may belong to some other business, some other department. Of course, everything that you're using outside now in the cloud, IaaS or SaaS or third-party APIs, are all outside of your control. And the only part that you really do control is like a little wedge. Like for IaaS, you control only the layers that that provider allows you to have access to. For SaaS, it's just a little tiny wedge. just a little red wedge of the part that is your account in that SaaS software. For APIs, the only thing you can control is how you use those APIs. And of course, people think that they control the user, but they actually don't. They really, really don't. And for those of you who are asking, where are the microservices? Well, they're so tiny you can't actually see them on this diagram. So let's talk about giving away control, because users are going to grab and take away that control, and it's not going to be graceful. How can we give away control gracefully and voluntarily? What would this look like in system design? It might be something like externalizing business rules for an application so that the business can change those rules whenever they want to without you having to rewrite the whole application. So, for example, when the legislature decides to come back into session and go playing around with school finance formulas, you don't have to worry about it. That's an example. Or setting up a self-service portal where researchers can go and input the types of data that they want to work with and look up for themselves what regulatory and security requirements they have to comply with. And I've seen this already at universities. People are already doing that. How many of you have read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim? I love that book. Those of you who have read it, do you remember being introduced to Brent? Poor Brent, the guy who was on call all the time because he was the only one who knew certain things or could do certain things. And he became a locus of control that also became a bottleneck. And that's one of the things that we have to examine in control when we're trying to give it away. Where does too much control collect that we need to give away? Now, I didn't want to steal Gene's character, Brent, so I made up my own. This is Brenda. Well, actually, she's Hafsa, but she is still not having any of your nonsense. You do not want somebody who is a central bottleneck in your processes. And this is why, as we design systems, we want to think not only about technical security controls and operational controls, but process flows and business decisions and security escalations and so on. Now, if you're still not convinced that we should be giving away control, let me throw another idea at you, which is the idea that control equals cost. When you need to control something, it costs you more because you need to specify your policies and your requirements. You need to monitor for compliance with those requirements. You need to enforce them. You need to maintain everything. Now, this, again, is something that we've known about ever since we started moving to the cloud a long time ago, but we haven't talked about it explicitly enough, where you are looking at your infrastructure diagrams and going, here's where there is control here. We don't actually need this, which is why we can move it to a third party to worry about. But we need to keep this control here because this is most important to us from a business risk perspective. And we know it's going to cost us more, but it's worth the cost in this case. So this is what we want to start thinking about as we give away control. If we do this successfully, and again, something like DevOps is also very much about control, giving away control of operations to the people who are closest to doing them, shifting security control, shifting operational control, deployment, and all these other steps, so that everything can flow faster. If we do this in many other aspects of our operations, then we can really accelerate the business, which is what we all want to do, right? All right, let's talk about simplifying design. Design measures that take away the complexity in security and make it understandable. Factor people in during the design and implementation of security measures. This is a quote from my friend Elizabeth Kolade, who is the secretary of the Cybersecurity Experts Association of Nigeria. And this is what democratizing security means to her. Now, have you noticed that in security, we keep asking the same questions over and over again? Like, Why doesn't management listen to our risk analysis? Or why are security professionals getting burned out? Because we are at a higher and higher rate, and it's something we need to discuss. And here's my favorite question. Why do users keep clicking on things we tell them not to click on? Everybody is asking about that. Well, I'll tell you why. First of all, users have different priorities than we do. This is well known. And also, hello, the entire internet is built to click on. It is all about clicking. And we don't help as security vendors when we say, here, click here to download this 18-page document on how not to click on things. This is not helping at all. And there are people whose entire jobs are to click on things, to open attachments, in HR, to open resumes, accounting, to open invoices, all these sorts of things. It does not help when we as security people yell at them to stop clicking on things. This really doesn't help at all. We all get caught by these things. I'm pretty new to Cisco. I think I've now been with Cisco about 2 years. And early on, I got an email that said, your PTO is about to expire. Click here. And I was new to Cisco. I didn't know. I thought, is that a thing here? I didn't know that was a thing. And I almost clicked on the link. And, I've been in security for 25 years, and yet I almost clicked on the link. It is unreasonable for us to be yelling at users for mistakes, for things that they naturally want to do and that they need to do. When I was working for a state agency in the US, my general counsel asked for me to set up a mail filter to stop social security numbers from getting mailed outside of the agency. So great, I set up the filter. A couple of months later, guess who got caught mailing SSNs to himself in the form of performance evaluations that he was sending to his personal address at home? The same guy. It was like, you wanted me to stop this. Why are you doing this? Because this is natural. This is normal. And we have to get used to it. We cannot yell at users and turn ourselves into a meme and say, just don't do that. We are way past that. Users are just trying to do their job. Now, here's another thing to think about. When I started in tech a very long time ago, it was a very small community. Most of us knew each other. We all had the same backgrounds. We all had the same levels of knowledge. So you could describe something as being intuitively obvious because we all came from the same base of knowledge. That's not the case anymore. Now we write for the world. We write for our neighbors, for our friends, for people in countries that we've never been to. They don't know the same things that we know, and in fact, they shouldn't have to. They really shouldn't have to. Take, for example, a spoon. Yeah, I said a spoon. Bear with me here. Just go with me. Think about a spoon. It is such a beautiful design. It is really hard to get it wrong. Have you ever noticed that? You pick it up, and it's hard to do it wrong. Yes, when you're a kid, you might hold it like that, but you figure it out pretty fast. After that, for the rest of your life, you can go anywhere in the world, and if you see a spoon, you can pick it up and know how to use it. Wouldn't it be great if security were as easy to use as a spoon? I mean, nobody needs annual spoon awareness training. This is something that we should be aiming for. Here's a concrete example of what design can do for security. Remember when Apple came out with a lock screen for their iPhone and you had to type in 4 numbers, you had to type in a PIN or a more complicated password. From their own numbers, their own statistics, they discovered that only about 35% of their workforce was using it. Even Steve Jobs refused to use it because it was so annoying to unlock the screen by typing in numbers. When they came out with Touch ID, their adoption shot up to 80%. And why? Not just because it was biometrics, because biometrics had been around for quite some time. They weren't as easy to use. This was certainly easy to use, but here's the brilliant part of the design. They put the fingerprint reader on the home button, which is where the user was going to click anyway. That is where you get seamless design. And that's why it became so easy to adopt security that design made that possible. The other thing that we need to do in design is create security controls for a wider range of personas. As you know, there is no single type of software engineer anymore. And yet we still are designing for one role, one persona of each type when we're designing an application. We're thinking about one admin, one type of user maybe, or a couple of roles. But especially in DevOps, if you are owning from one end to another an entire process, your persona or the things that you're interested in, the things that you need, the things that frustrate you are going to be different. And the tools that you use are going to be different depending on where you are in the process. It's not just one persona anymore. And most of the users that we have today are not technical. And so we have to design better for them. We need to radically simplify the security that we ask you to use. Now, as technologists, we're comfortable with a certain amount of complexity, but our users really don't care. They do not want to admire our dashboard for hours on end, playing with all the little buttons and knobs and settings and configurations and everything. No, they want to do a job. They want to get in, they want to fix something usually, and then they want to get out again. So we have to simplify things in the way that they want to use the controls, not the way that we think they should. We need to give them a consumer grade experience. And you know what I'm talking about. You know the difference between what you choose to use at home because you're comfortable with it, it's easy to use, and something especially at work that is designed as if they really didn't care who liked to use it because you were stuck. Your employer made you use it and you just have to put up with it. You know the difference here. And a consumer grade experience is something that users are going to vote for. They're going to vote for it with their budget dollars, with their compliance or non-compliance with security controls. And we have to be able to compete in the marketplace to give them a consumer grade experience. Now, let me ask you another question that I've been wondering about. What does a developer grade security experience look like? Think about the tools that you really like to use. And this is the point where everybody goes, Snyk, Snyk, right? Right? Yeah, good deal. Those tools that you didn't have to spend 6 months setting up just the way you liked them because they already pretty much came that way. The ones that are so comfortable, you can spend all day in them and you don't resent it when you have to go and do something. What does that developer experience feel like to you for security? And I'll tell you what it should not look like. It cannot look like this. It cannot be what I used to call scanning and scolding, where we would scan your app and say, ooh, you missed a spot. Oh, here's a list, a complete list of your failures in a 500-page PDF that we put on your desk and say, let us know when you fix all of these. Oh, and by the way, we need a traceability matrix. We need to be able to trace every line of code that you change to a documented requirement, which is here in this 500-page PDF. This actually happened one place where I was working, where they had a rule that any code change you made had to be traceable back to a documented requirement, which sounded great. It sounded reasonable at the time, but not when you have the output from a Fortify scan on a 10-year-old application. So this is the sort of thing that we need to move away from in security. For the sake of your sanity and our sanity, we have to continue to evolve security for you. Because if we can simplify the experience for you, then we can get better results for everyone. Here we go. Last one, round the bend. Open culture. In a digital society, security has to be basic knowledge, freely available and taught to all ages. Both the laws and the morals of this society must adapt and behave accordingly. This is a quote from my friend Sarah Krische, who is a freelance journalist in Austria. This is what democratizing security means to her. It's interesting that she says the morals as well as the laws of the society have to adapt and behave accordingly to democratize security. We have to make security part of everybody's culture. And by this, I don't mean that we force our security culture on everybody else. We don't go to everybody and say, okay, we're going to issue you a hoodie and here's some lockpicks and now you're a security person. No, we have to work with what security means to them, what they need security for, what their concerns are, and help them develop a security culture that works for them. Now, here's an example. When you have a kid going into kindergarten and they don't know their letters and numbers yet, how are they supposed to type in a password? Now, there are companies that are working on things like this, like a QR code on a badge that they wear around their neck that they can hold up to the camera and log in that way. But we have a lot farther to go. Because here's the thing, in democratizing security, I don't think that we should continue to subject our kids and the next generations to the authoritarian model of security that we've had up until now. We cannot wait for them to grow up and get jobs and learn about security from the policies that their employer forces on them. We have to start enabling them to understand and make security decisions now. As soon as they're old enough to understand, bit by bit, they have to start making decisions. So here's what I believe. I think we should disable parental controls on technology. I know, everybody's going to have a heart attack here, but I think it is very important to enable them to start making their own decisions. I don't use parental controls at home. And a few months ago, my 16-year-old came to me and she asked if I could help her set the parental controls on her iPhone. And I said, what? Why? It's because she wanted help enforcing her own discipline for getting her studies done. So I said, fine. And she set up the parental controls the way she wanted to, the times that she could use certain apps and when she couldn't. And then I put a password on there that she didn't know. And every time that she wants to change a setting, she comes back to me and I put in the password and she changes it the way she wants it. This is the important thing. She's making her own decisions on how to control her own use. And this is where I think we should be going for everything, because this is how we're going to secure the future. Have you noticed that as we've been going on through the decades, through different technologies, we keep running into the same security mistakes being made in software? We had web application security problems, and then we saw them again in mobile security. We see them in IoT. It's not that people aren't learning the lessons. It's because it's a different demographic doing them each time. It's a different set of people. It is a new crowd of people coming in and starting to do development for these new technologies, and they simply haven't learned the security lessons that we already know. This is why it's really important to teach security and open up the culture to everybody, because you never know who is going to come in and start writing code for internet-enabled sneakers. That really is a thing. I saw a Kickstarter for it, internet-enabled sneakers. This is why we need to bring this to everybody, and it's why I describe this as security of, by, and for the people. It's got to be for everybody. It cannot be the province anymore of developers, of system administrators, other technologists, auditors, analysts, CIOs, you name it. It's got to be for everybody. Everybody who's in this picture should be able to take part in making security decisions. And I really mean everybody in this picture. Now, some of you out there are probably still going, yeah, even my mom can use this. And I want you to stop, all right? Because I'm your mom. In fact, my 21-year-old got really upset when he figured out that my husband and I knew more about technology than he did. He thought it was unfair because we were the parents, we were the old generation. We weren't supposed to be comfortable with this stuff. And I said, honey, who do you think built the internet? So, yes, those of us who have worked on this for a very long time have to be able to share it and hand it over and give up that control. We've got to be able to take our sonic screwdrivers and hand them to the next generation, even though we've been working on security for a very long time. I mean, I remember when SPAF was still at Georgia Tech. And this was before the cult of the dead cow and the loft. I mean, security did not start in the 90s, people, all right? And you millennials with your bit chain and your block coin and all right, who did this? Okay. Okay, it's fair. I am a boomer. And maybe I'm not the one to be taking this journey by myself because I've been so used to thinking the old way for so long. That's why we need to bring everybody in on this with all their different perspectives. We need to move from control to collaboration in everything that we do for security. We need to simplify the design for everybody. And I know that this is probably what you think of as the hard part, because just as we don't expect everybody to understand technology, I wouldn't expect you to know what chiaroscuro means. Um, Actually, it's a graphic design term for light and darkness being used to depict volume and dimensions in an image. But okay, now you know. So this is where we have to bring everybody in, especially designers, to simplify security design. And we need to open the culture. We need to make it not just about us being wizards and them being muggles, but about us understanding and embracing what they need to use security for. So it's hard, I know, but I believe that we can do this. We can do this. Let's do this.